All right, well, we're a little over a week away from the election, and I'm sure you've noticed, but political polarization is at an all-time high. Over the weekend, Trump had a rally in Madison Square Garden that many people were comparing to a Nazi rally that was held there in 1939. So I guess anything held at Madison Square Garden is apparently a Nazi rally, but of course, this isn't the first time we've heard Republicans and Trump being compared to Nazis or fascists. We're also hearing a lot of ramped up rhetoric about Kamala Harris and Democrats being evil.
She is
Check
the
this out.
devil, whoever screamed that out. She is the Antichrist.
Okay, so she's the devil, she's the Antichrist. We're hearing this. Trump's a Nazi, Republicans are fascists. Look, it's not really healthy to demonize the other side. In fact, I think it leads to dystopian policies and backwards culture that the people start feeling the need to censor and persecute in order to stop evil. We must stop this. This is what we saw from Democrats after 2016. A lot of this, we got to stop fascists. We have to stop the end of democracy. And they really kind of dwindled away at democracy in order to preserve democracy. So I don't think this is really a good idea to be going down this path. Well, how do we get over this political division and go back to looking at each other as people with the same goals, but with different ideas? Joining us now is John Wood Jr. He is the National Ambassador for Braver Angels. Braver Angels is a grassroots organization focused on bridging America's political divide. It was founded after the 2016 election. Braver Angels promotes understanding and collaboration among individuals with differing viewpoints. John, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here.
It's great to be back, Kim.
So a lot of division right now. It is so crazy right now. I don't feel like I can talk to anybody. I mean, besides you, I could definitely talk to you, but there's a lot of people, people that I thought were reasonable on one side or the other. As we get closer to the election, it's like insanity has set in. It's very difficult to have conversations with people on either side. If you make one criticism about Trump, for example, the Trump team comes out in full force attacking. If you make a criticism about Kamala, same thing, right? The Kamala hive comes after, and it's just absolutely insane right now. I'm hoping it calms down. But you have for us 3 pointers for how we can have more productive conversations with the other side. So what are some ways we can do this? Well, first, what are your thoughts on just the polarization that's going on right now? I mean, you've been in this world for a while, trying to help depolarize. So are you feeling like things are worse now, or are they better now than they were, like, let's say 4 years ago at the last election?
Well, we haven't crossed the threshold of the 2024 election yet. So ask me whether it's better or worse, maybe after after election day. I mean, look, I think that we are in a comparable situation. I think that the overall arc of American politics and our civil society has just been on this relentless slide into tribalism. And, the thing is that our political opinions and affiliations have become our actual identities as human beings, right? That's really what accounts for so much of the thickness, the stickiness of the problem. Because, in an ideal situation, you and I could disagree on a matter of politics or policy. And, we might be animated. We might even be a little, upset about something. But at the end of the day, ideally, it's not going to impact our relationship with each other, because I'm not going to define you as a human being because you're a Republican or a Democrat, because you voted for Donald Trump or Kamala Harris. And I do think that most Americans are not disposed to be that way, but the overall environment is such that more and more people are feeling radicalized in this way. Like, I can't allow you in my life if you're voting for this person, right?
Yeah.
So it's made the stakes very high for democracy and also for people's personal relationships. And I'm always trying to get people to understand that there's a connection between the two things, right? If we can't be in relationship with each other as neighbors, as Americans, as people who serve in government together, who go to school together, who are in the workplace together, the institutions that we populate also will not function. Like you said, and you're completely right, it leads to backwards culture and self-destructive policies, right? Because it's all about retribution and retaliation.
Right.
So, yeah.
Well, I think that's where, in my opinion, that's where we started to see an erosion of a lot of our actual democratic processes or rights. I mean, I say democratic processes just like what happened with Democrats this election, where they essentially just ushered Kamala in without a primary, without an official primary. They didn't even have an open convention where they had other candidates possibly, they just said, nope, this is our person. And we're trying to preserve democracy. It's like coming out of the same, like, we're preserving democracy by not giving you any choice. This is the only choice to preserve democracy. So here it is. Yeah. And that to me, the brain rot that happened on the left in 2016, that kind of started around that time when Trump was elected, led to these really dystopian ideas or policies, or that erosion, that we saw it after 2016. It was a lot of punch them in the face, punch the Nazis in the face, do what it takes to stop Nazis. We'll do it at all costs. We have to stop fascism and Nazis at all costs. And when you label the other side, your fellow Americans, as evil people, like it's a fight between good and evil, which now I'm hearing that ramped up on the right. And that scares me to death, because I thought, after 2016, I started to find more allies, I would say, on the right side of the aisle, whereas I had come from the left mostly. I'd found these allies on the right because it seemed like they were aware of the craziness that had infected the left. But now what I think is so scary is I'm seeing that same exact rhetoric now coming from the right, where they're saying, we must stop Democrats. They're evil. We heard that guy. He's the Antichrist. Kamala's the Antichrist. He was talking about Kamala Harris, saying she's evil. She's the Antichrist. This is the same stuff I heard from Democrats about Donald Trump. And I just don't think that leads us. I think that makes things that's to me, the number one threat. People think it's Kamala Harris or Donald Trump. They're only one person. Yes, the office of the presidency is powerful, but really it's the cultural shift and the mentality of the American people that caused, I think, more than anything, the erosion. It's us. We're causing it.
No, you're absolutely correct. And really, this is the big story of the time that we're living in. And we sort of miss the forest for the trees when we get so wrapped up in the partisan back and forth of things that we fail to realize that there is a cultural kind of cancer that's spreading in American society. And even if you agree with 90% of the policies and politics of one side or the other, whatever you believe in, whatever you want to see pass politically is not going to be sustainable if the American people are veering towards a cultural and maybe even a physical sort of civil war with each other. And I don't want to be alarmist, but you have to ask yourself the question, at what point do we take an off-ramp towards a society that actually is able to reason together again? At what point do we go on a trajectory where we overcome tribalism again, right? If you can't tell me what the end point of that is, then we have to assume that we're going to reach the logical culmination of a society in which it is just commonplace for us to call each other's Nazis and Antichrists. And Kim, the one thing I would add to what you said is that I agree that we hit an inflection point in 2016, Trump and Clinton. But, during the Bush years, I mean, you remember, like, that was unprecedented in terms of the polarization. Yeah. People call Bush a Nazi all over the place. I remember seeing polls during the Obama years that said something like maybe a quarter of like registered Republicans, or maybe self-identified like social conservative Republicans, thought Barack Obama might be the Antichrist, right? So like the momentum, right? So like the Kamala, that's like a familiar tune, right? Is what took people so long to start calling her the Antichrist? The trajectory we are going in is something that is politically motivated. It's to the short-term benefit of pundits and politicians at the expense of our long-term ability to maintain community with each other, to maintain democracy, and to even be able to get along with our friends and our neighbors. Yeah. If we don't see that as being the big problem, we are never going to be in a position to be able to turn the tide.
You're right. We got to be able to get along with our neighbors, with our own family members. And I've been guilty of it. I mean, look, 2016, after that election, I had Trump derangement syndrome. And I did. I'm super ashamed by it that Thanksgiving wasn't a good one for my mother, who I berated for supporting Donald Trump. I mean, I should have never done that. I feel so terrible about letting it get to me like that, to where I made my own mother feel bad on a holiday. And I'm not alone in that. There's a lot of us who have partaken in this brain rot. We've all been Many of us, not all of us, thank God, but many of us have been unfortunately victims of our own psychosis, of thinking the other side is just really, really awful and terrible. And then I was a victim of it during the COVID pandemic when people in my own family didn't want to have anything to do with me because of my stances on the COVID pandemic, thinking that I was a grandma killer for saying the vaccines didn't stop the spread. I mean, so we've got, and that, I think those two things were for me a particular lesson of, I don't want to do that. I don't think, even if I don't agree with Democrats or Republicans on certain issues, that even if I vehemently don't agree on certain topics, the person, I have to remember there are people that I love in my life who I love and adore and respect, who are on the opposite side of, let's say, the trans child issue. Like they think it's good to affirm. They want to do the affirmations. They want to accept. These are not bad people. I talk to them and I find out, why do they think the way they do? What is their end goal in this? And they're not plotting some sinister dystopian takeover by trying to eradicate gender. It's not like this plan that some people are thinking, oh, they've got this plan of Marxism, marching in Marxism, and they're going to march in all this. It's like these people don't even know what Marxism is. Like they're not even interested in that. They just genuinely feel like it would be better for they have their own reasons for thinking certain things. And I have to, I think we have to remember that we're all coming from, we're all trying to make the world a better place. Even if the method is, we don't agree with it. I think we're all trying to, rather than this whole like, no, you're just evil. I mean, once you just say, oh, the other side's just evil, right? That's where, how do you combat that?
Yeah, right. Well, and so, but let us, of course, acknowledge why this is difficult, because with everything you said, having, being true, and something that I adamantly agree with, you will also know, as everybody watching knows, that elections do have consequences, and the things that pit us against each other in disagreement, the things that we find it important to debate about, the things that we care about in the trajectory of our society, whether it's trans issues, whether it's immigration, whether it's the Constitution, whether it's Israel and Gaza, Russia and Ukraine, etc. The outcome of these things matter. They are moral issues. And so, it's fair to respond to them in that way and say, look, I've got to lay it on the line to advocate for my position, right? And I'm going to push the people around me, because this is democracy, to try and understand at least, where I'm coming from. It's completely legitimate. But the thing about living in a constitutional republic, the thing about living in a liberal democracy, small L liberal, like we live in, is that you've got to be committed to two things simultaneously. On the one hand, you've got to be committed to the short-term imperative of advocating for the things that you believe in, along with the party or the politician that you believe in a given election cycle. And in that context, you've got to be willing to voice your opinion, if you're a person who has moved to do so. I've run for office. I've run for Congress. Kim, you've made a career speaking truth to power and speaking from the vantage point of your convictions. So we know and we respect this process. But you have to do that simultaneously, in a way that also makes it possible for you to maintain the relationships of trust and respect within your own family, social circles, and across the broader fabric of American communities that allows for democracy to endure in the long run, right?
Yeah.
So in other words, if we advocate for our politics in a way that maybe wins the election in the short term, but destroys the fabric of society in the long term, then we've lost everything anyway. It's just a question of how short or long it takes to completely unravel. When Abraham Lincoln was, prior to being elected president, and then when he was elected president, of course, Lincoln was always animated against slavery as a moral abomination. But the thing about Lincoln is that at the same time, he did say consistently that even though if slavery is not wrong, nothing is wrong. And yet there are good people in American society and good people in the South who believe in slavery, who agree with slavery. Lincoln always drew the distinction between believing in something that was wicked and being wicked yourself intrinsically as a human being. In other words, it's possible for good, redeemable people to be wrong. And that was the legacy of Martin Luther King Jr. That was his philosophy, using the power of agape love in this approach to speaking truth to power through nonviolence. But what that was really about was speaking to the conscience of your opposition in a way that signaled goodwill towards your opposition. Basically saying, I disagree with you on a deeply important moral issue, and I'm going to try and push for change, but I'm doing it in a way that doesn't demonize you as a human being. I'm saying what you believe in is lending itself to evil, but you are made in the image of God. That was Dr. King's approach. That was his philosophy. And I think we've just lost that way of thinking about politics. We've lost that way of thinking about activism. So many of us, right? And so that's the flame of understanding that we're trying to rekindle at Braver Angels.
I like that. I like that it's, okay, look, you can be an activist, in your own way, whether it be an actual activist, you're out there doing activism work, or whether you're just an activist on Facebook, right? Where you say, or on Twitter, and you say your position, and, you voice what you want for this country. But you've got a distinct, that I like that everybody needs to remember that we also have to be a democracy. So you can be an activist within a democracy. And it's important to remember that everybody gets a choice. And you've got to persuade them with your activism. That's the point of activism, right? Is to persuade them, give them better ideas, teach them your ideas, and then hope that they come around sooner or later to your idea. And maybe they don't. And if they don't, that's okay. We're still in this community together under a democracy. And I think it's really important to remember that we're not evil. We're not inherently evil. There might be bad ideas or evil ideas even that people have bought into, but that the people themselves are not evil. And that is so hard for so many people, especially, look, we get really, really emotional about a lot of these topics because they just seem so downright egregious or evil, in their, like slavery, like how do you get, what's more evil than that? And yet you've got, to understand that a lot of people in the country agreed with it and believed it, and they needed persuading to not agree with it and not believe it. And that wasn't easy, right? But it did happen eventually. I don't know of anybody today who agrees with slavery. I'm sure there's probably some fringe person somewhere, that we could find. But give us these 3 tips for braver conversations that you guys send out at Braver Angels. I just think so many of us need to, how many people I hear from that I can't even count anymore, how many people I've heard from who've said, I just had to completely distance myself from politics altogether. I've had to completely disengage because I'm exhausted. I don't want to fight. I don't want to feel demonized. I don't want to demonize other people. They're feeling this exhaustion. But you guys at Braver Angels help people have these conversations, see the other side, listen to each other, and have it be actually productive. So give us some pointers besides the great ones you've already given us, if they're any different.
Yeah, right. Well, look, so first of all, there are different contexts for political communication, right? And part of what I would want to impress upon people is the fact that, every moment is not necessarily a moment in which you want to have an argument with somebody, right? Sometimes the most wise thing to do is to know when to keep quiet, know when to give somebody their space, and so forth. And sometimes
that's a tough one. That's a tough one, right? Sometimes just keep your mouth shut this time, right?
some of us are gladiators. Some of us never say no to a chance to wage into the arena. And then sometimes some of us want to say something, but we don't feel like we can do it in a way that actually makes anything any better, right? And so we want to be confident in both our silence as well as our ability to speak, depending on whether or not we deem the situation appropriate to it, right? Sometimes it's important to be able to talk about politics without trying to persuade somebody, though, because a big part of what we need to do in order to stay in relationship with each other and our families, etc., is to just show that we understand each other and we humanize each other, right? And so every moment is not necessarily a moment for persuasion. And so one thing that we want to be able to do is listen to understand and not necessarily to persuade, right? We want to achieve something that you would refer to as accurate disagreement. And so it's
Hmm.
very important in listening to somebody who's, say, spouting off about, their opinions on, I don't know, social justice or immigration, whatever the case may be. Your woke cousin or your MAGA uncle, whatever the case may be. You want to be able to represent their position in terms that they themselves would agree with, as honestly representing what they believe, even if you don't agree with what they believe, right? And
Okay.
so
Yeah.
we right. So we refer to, I mean, one way you can refer to this as is just paraphrasing, being able to accurately paraphrase what somebody else happens to believe. So if we're talking about abortion,
Without
and if you're
without straw manning, without
exactly
demonizing their position, but just really truly trying to understand it from their perspective.
without characterizing their position, right? See, it's a lot
Okay. Yeah.
easier to characterize than to accurately paraphrase what somebody else thinks. And so just take abortion as a possible topical example, right? Let's say hypothetically you're pro-choice and I'm pro-life, and I'm talking about my views on the subject. Well, you might be inclined to characterize that by saying, okay, well, you just don't think a woman should be able to choose what she does with her own body. You don't think women should have the rights of equal citizens, right? And in your mind, you might feel like that's what the policy amounts to. But more likely than not, I'm saying something different if you're actually listening to me. More likely than not, what I'm saying is something along the lines of, I believe that the unborn are human beings too, and that
Mm.
even a baby in the womb has a life that is sacred, that is worthy of respect and protection in the way that all human life is worthy of the protection of the law. And so if you are taking the time to listen closely to me, you can say back to me, like, I hear what you're saying, as I hear you saying that the life of the unborn is important to you, that it's
Hmm.
sacred, that it's worthy of respect, right? Um, that when you say it in those terms, I can hear you speaking back to me and think to myself, okay, she's heard what I have to say, right? I've been listened to. That's half of what anybody wants to begin with, is just being heard, right?
Yeah.
Um, the Now, in addition to that, if you want to move in the direction of offering your own opinion, it becomes important to sort of pivot in the conversation in a way that doesn't pitch you against the other person in a zero-sum clash of opinions, but that humanizes both sides of the conversation as being as coming from a place of humility. And so we stress something called I statements in Braver Angels as opposed to truth statements, right? And
Hmm.
so from a pro-choice vantage point, you could resort to a truth statement in response to what I've just said about abortion and say something along the lines of, unfortunately, you're wrong. The science is in. Fetuses are not conscious like human beings or whatnot. I mean, whether that's
Hmm.
right or wrong, you could say that. You can introduce your opinion as like a matter of fact. But what you'll do is provoke me into putting my hands up, right? And moving into a defensive posture where suddenly now it's a zero-sum competition of our opinions that could break our relationship. But if instead you were to introduce your opinion by first using an I statement, saying something along the lines of, like, I have a different view of this, or like, I have a different experience with this issue, a different perspective on this, or I've read some different information about this. You change the trajectory and the temperature of the conversation, but you do it in a way that emphasizes your own humanity, and therefore you maintain a posture of humility, right? Like, I'm preparing you to hear something that you're going to disagree with coming from me, but I'm doing it in a way that basically is saying, like, look, like, this is my human point of view, and you're
Hmm.
mirroring a sense of, like, open-mindedness, availability, or at least just a sense of, again, humility is kind of the key word here, that what you're about to say may be a difference of opinion, but it is not an attack. And then you move into offering your perspective if you want to do so. Like, I happen to think, based on my experience, that an unborn child is not really the same thing as a fully grown human adult, and that there's also, in my experience, the matter of equality between the genders, right? And a woman's ability to choose what she does with her own body, just like a man has a right to choose what he does with his own body. That perspective is not necessarily going to persuade me as the pro-life person in this conversation, that I'm wrong, but it will allow me to receive what you're saying in a way to where I could at least say, like, okay, I disagree with what you're saying, but I recognize your sincerity. I recognize
Hmm.
the fact that you're honest. You're speaking to me with goodwill, and so that's going to trigger my own kind of willingness to speak in a more sympathetic way in return. And if that's the way we're communicating, the good news is we can keep communicating. We can keep
Yeah.
talking. We can keep reasoning with each other and open up the space for genuine persuasion to occur, if it can occur, in a context of trust. And trust is the holy grail of our work at Braver Angels. Because without trust, you don't have functioning individual relationships between individual human beings. And without trust, you don't have a functioning democracy or functioning institutions in a free and self-governing society like our own. Everything crumbles in the absence of trust.
Seems like our politicians really could use these pointers. They should be going to your guys' seminars and workshops, right? Like it almost should be
We do work with some
mandatory.
politicians. Yeah, we do work with
Yeah.
some politicians. We actually have Braver Angels legislative caucuses in Minnesota and Utah, if I'm not
Mm,
mistaken. And we're working on a couple more. It does go against some of the built-in business incentives of political culture for
mhm.
politicians to take some of these habits on board, because frankly, politicians are frequently rewarded in the media and by polarized donors and so forth
Yeah.
for wading into sort of like this cultural warfare way of talking to each other. But there are also a
Yeah.
lot of politicians, Republicans and Democrats, who at the end of the day are good people who don't actually enjoy the bile. They don't enjoy the poisonous, way in which we do things. And there's some who quietly, would like to be able to have a reasonable conversation with their counterparts on the other side of the aisle, but nobody's helping them do it. We are trying to show up on that level as well.
Well, I love it. We need more of it. There's no doubt about it. I think we're all pretty exhausted since 2016 of the polarization. You're right. It's been going on much longer than that, but I feel like it's been more prominent in our faces maybe since 2016, maybe because we have more social media. The COVID pandemic, I think, exacerbated it quite a bit. But
Yeah.
braverangels.org is where people can go. You can sign up for the newsletter, sign up to find out about the workshops, the seminars, and you'll get these 3 points, the 3-point action plan, so you can remember exactly how to talk to the other side in a productive way, and also to facilitate, happier holidays, I think, coming up, because it's going to get nutty, right? This thing, it's going to get nutty again. Somebody's going to lose, somebody's going to win. That's just the nature of the game. And so this Thanksgiving is going to be potentially polarizing for a lot of people. So hopefully people can take these action plan, the way to discuss with them and have a happy holiday season this year. So John Wood
Tim,
Jr., thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate it.
I hope all your viewers can be with the people that they love and that they can keep loving each other at Thanksgiving and Christmas. We need a whole lot more love in America. And really, at the end of the day, that's what it comes down to. So I love you, Kim, and thanks for having me on.
Love you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for watching. This was just a clip from the longer, larger show that you can catch Monday through Friday, 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern at KimIversonShow.com. That'll route you to the platform where you need to be in order to get the full uncensored show every Monday through Friday, 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern. Click on that link, watch the full interview. See you there.